The time has finally come. Fantastic Four is dropping in a few days, and Phase 6 is going to start for the MCU. So we wanted to give you our Phase 5 movie ranking.
Everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Jocelyn.
I'm Jaden.
And this is Beyond the Film Room, where we break down film from the perspective of the four cores of peak performance. Today, we're going to do something a little bit different. We are going to deviate from that structure a little bit, and we're just going to talk about Marvel Phase 5 as we lead into Phase 6. So Fantastic Four, 3 days away. I just saw an ad this morning on like the website, like one of those banner ads, and it literally had a countdown. I've never seen that before for a movie. Yeah, it had like 3 days, how many hours, how many seconds, kind of thing. So I think everyone's pretty hyped for this, and we're going to do obviously a Fantastic Four review once the movie drops. We're probably going to see it at least twice over the weekend, if not more. So we expect that next week. But leading into that, we wanted to do a breakdown of Phase 5.
Yeah, I think it's a great time to do this because we're entering a new phase of the MCU. And seemingly, we can talk about this in a second, might be the last phase of the MCU as we know it. But Phase 5 has just come to a wrap. Thunderbolts came out in May. And I thought it'd be cool to just kind of look back on this previous phase before we hop into the next phase of the MCU.
Yeah, the timing is great. So as of this filming, an announcement just dropped. Kevin Feige did a big media interview, like Variety, Hollywood Reporter, a bunch of big places. And he did kind of a full breakdown of what's upcoming. And it's pretty big. Like there was some shocking stuff that he talked about. So I think the timing of this breakdown of Phase 5 is good. We will dive deeper into that interview with Kevin Feige in the next couple weeks. Like there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
But for now, heading into Fantastic Four, here's our Phase 5 ranking. Now, caveat here, we didn't include TV shows.
So it's kind of hard to separate the movies from the shows a little bit because the shows have so much more depth. It's like watching 2 to 3 movies rather than watching one movie. I also think, and maybe you can kind of add to this, I don't know if the TV shows to Phase 5 in comparison to Phase 4 really added a lot to the MCU or as much as Phase 4's did. We had Echo, we had Born Again, we had Ironheart and Secret Invasion and Agatha all along. I just think
and
that
Loki season
2, which was amazing, by the way. I just don't think that they add as much to like the core of the MCU as like obviously the movies did, and even like WandaVision, Loki, Hawkeye, those ones from Phase 4.
Agreed. Yeah, I think with the exception of Loki, which could potentially have a pretty big role in how Phase 6 starts and ends. Yeah, the rest of the TV shows I don't think played as big a part. Now, I think there are some things to consider as we get into our rankings here, that there are elements of the TV shows that kind of come into play. And it was a struggle for me because there was a lot of TV shows in this phase. I don't know compared to the other phases, where it ranks, but I think we said there were 6 TV shows.
Yeah, and there were 6 movies, so they had a TV show for each movie.
Yeah, basically. To start off with, Phase 5, movie number 6 in my list was the only MCU movie that we made like a conscious decision not even to go see in the theaters. So when this movie was announced, and after the previous, the movie before this, TV shows leading up to this, we were kind of like, that's cool, but maybe we won't check it out in theaters. 2 characters were introduced in TV shows for this movie,
right, yeah,
which hadn't really occurred to me until just now. And I think thinking about what Kevin Feige says in this interview, which we won't talk about today, but I read a little bit of it. And one of the things he said was that some of what he thinks was the struggle for this recent slew of Marvel movies and them kind of underperforming, despite some of them being critically well reviewed, was the fact that there were characters that were introduced in the TV shows, and if people didn't know who they were less interested in seeing the movie. And I think this movie that comes in at number 6 for me is a prime example of that. And that movie is The Marvels. So it was underwhelming. I mean, I barely even remember the plot of this movie. Yeah, I think the trailers were interesting. This is one movie where I thought the movie itself, I didn't really have much interest in seeing, but the pace of the trailers and like the music, and it just seemed like a fun movie.
Yeah.
but it wasn't my type of fun. I was like, this doesn't really fit in with the rest of the kind of the typical MCU movies that we were anticipating. And the main character, I think, has struggled. And here's a question: who was the main character in this movie?
Yeah,
right?
fair.
Was it the original Captain Marvel? Carol Danvers. Was it the new Captain Marvel? Was it Miss Marvel? Who knows? I think, as much as I liked the first Captain Marvel movie, for whatever reason, this character has received a fair bit of backlash. I don't know if it's Brie Larson and if people have an issue with Brie Larson as a person, as an actor. I'm not sure exactly what it is. Or if they just felt like, for whatever reason, she is not an appealing character to watch. But there was not a lot of interest in character development in this movie itself. Like all of the character development happened in the TV shows, in the previous movies, and it just felt like these characters were kind of thrown together because they had been revealed and announced, and it would be cool to kind of see how they interact. The highlight of this movie was literally the last 30 seconds because it set up something that is to come in terms of the new X-Men movie. So I remember when we watched this at home and we're underwhelmed for the whole movie kind of thing. We're like, oh well, we had heard that there was a big reveal in the end credits. So we kind of we sat through it and we're like, okay, well, we wonder what this is. To this day, that's probably the most, next to Thanos' reveal in the end credits, this is probably the most shocking, and we literally jumped out of our seats when we saw this end credit. That's the highlight of this movie for me, which is why it's at number 6.
Yeah. So I don't want to repeat, but at my number 6, for the reasons you listed, I also have the Marvels. Now, I wanted to like this one more. I really did. Like you said, the trailers gave me a certain type of energy that I was feeding off of and I was excited for. But it is also the only MCU movie we didn't even go to see in theaters. And it was the Rotten Tomatoes, it was the reviews, it was the lack of interest as the movie came out. And yeah, when you watch it, it's just, I found, and I know you found the same, it was just underwhelming. And the character development wasn't great. Miss Marvel was a highlight for me. And the villain.
What was the villain? Was she Kree? I can't even really remember.
I don't really remember. She was upset about something that happened with
she
her.
had Ronan's hammer.
Yeah, I don't know. The villain just wasn't good and wasn't memorable in my opinion. I agree with your point on Carol Danvers. I actually don't mind the first Captain Marvel movie. I don't think it's top tier per se, but I think it's a fine watch, and it was a good movie when it came out. But yeah, people have an issue with her character for whatever reason. Yeah, the Marvels just, it didn't do it for me. The villain wasn't great at all, and the story was kind of all over the place. I don't remember most of it. Granted, I've only seen it once, so if you do like the Marvels and you have it higher on your Phase 5 ranking, I have only seen it once. So maybe if a second watch will help that. But yeah, the highlight of the movie was a top 5, top 3 maybe MCU end credit scene ever with the Beast showing up. And what that now is going to do for Doomsday with the old cast coming back for the X-Men movies, that will be interesting to see. And funny enough, despite the Marvels being kind of a movie that isn't memorable, it probably is going to impact Doomsday more so than other MCU movies that came out recently because of Beast showing up and because Monica is now in this separate universe, and we know these universes are going to come together. So yeah, I have the Marvels for that reason as well. Just wasn't memorable.
Yeah, wasn't memorable. And as I'm thinking about kind of end credits, it's funny because Captain Marvel, I think, is in 2 of the top 3 end credit scenes for me. So the one where she shows up and she's like, "Where's Fury?" Right? And you kind of get chills as this major thing has just happened. And then before Infinity War, where Nick Fury pulls out the pager,
right? Yeah, she's
right?
in quite a few.
And he is paging Captain Marvel. And I think, and we won't go into this, but I think it's relevant for this movie specifically. And I kind of think about the 4 cores of performance, and I think about the physical aspect. Her character is arguably, currently anyway, the most powerful person in the MCU. I would.
Would you have her,
I would
Sentry,
argue,
or Wanda?
Yeah, I guess now with the introduction of Sentry, yes, they're probably comparable. So, but you raise a good point, because if you talk about Sentry or Wanda or Carol Danvers, Miss Marvel. Of the three of those, her character seems the most hollow. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. And Sentry only had one movie.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah, I was thinking about this as we were coming up with our rankings, and I don't really understand why the direction they went with Captain Marvel was to barely have her involved in the MCU.
Right.
Like, her movie came before the biggest movie in the entire MCU, and she was in Endgame for 2 minutes in the beginning, and then she's off, and they have an excuse for her being off, and then she comes to show up to fight against Thanos for a minute, and then we don't see her again until the Marvels. And we haven't heard anything about her.
Haven't heard
being in
anything about
Doomsday.
her. And she shows up in Endgame, and is the most. She is the pivot point of the battle.
Yeah.
Right. But again, you make a good comparison to Sentry and Wanda in that we've seen, even in Sentry's one movie, we get a sense of, and if we talk about the other cores here, spiritual and relational, we get some buildup of and mental, of course. We get some buildup of who these characters are, what's important to them, why we should empathize and relate to them, and how they struggle, right? So Sentry and Wanda specifically, like we got a whole series as to why Wanda was as messed up as she happened to be in Multiverse of Madness. And while she's the villain in that movie, we all empathize and relate to her. And in this phase, she was the one character that we were all hoping, like, oh, is she going to show up?
Right? Like,
is Wanda going to show
more.
up? Yeah.
Yeah, she is probably up there with the most well-written characters that the MCU has introduced because her story runs so deep, and she got introduced way back in phase 2.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, Captain Marvel, she was a turning point in Endgame, but they just don't really use her that much. And even in the Marvels, it didn't even feel like she was supposed to be the main character, but it didn't even feel like she was the main character.
Exactly. She felt like another sidekick.
Yeah.
And even in her own movie, she was kind of a sidekick, right? Because you have the character development of Monica Rambeau, and you understand, their relationship. And I can't remember who was the name of the Kree person that she actually got her powers from.
Right. There was like her mentor.
Right.
There was Jan Rog.
Right.
There was like Maria Rambeau.
Right.
Nick Fury, and then the Skrull leader. So they were all kind of sharing, and obviously it was her movie, but
how much do we know about her as a person?
Yeah.
Right. And I think Kevin Feige, if you're listening, which you're probably not, but if you are,
that'd be sick.
And screenwriters for future movies, the character development I think is so critical, especially for a character as powerful as she is.
All right, so my number 5, it was a little bit of a toss-up between 6 and 5, only because I liked the end credits so much of the Marvels. And this movie, I do think gets a little bit too much hate. I'm not saying it's good, but I do think it gets a little bit too much hate. And it's also a movie that I was really excited for when we were getting trailers for it, and one that was using a villain that was introduced in Loki, and I loved him in Loki. I thought he was going to be great in this one, which he was, and that wasn't the issue with the movie. And that's Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Again, I was really excited for it. Like, I was really looking forward to seeing this movie. I was really looking forward to seeing Kang. I did think Kang in an Ant-Man movie as the villain was an interesting choice, but I wasn't upset with it. But the story just didn't hit. The story didn't hit. The CGI felt a little bit sloppy. Like, I know a lot of people didn't like the way MODOK looked. I know even the people that lived in the quantum realm, they weren't really cool. They weren't really that interesting. It was kind of all over the place. Kang loses to a bunch of ants, and then comes back and fights Ant-Man, and then loses that battle. The end credit was cool. It made me look forward to the future of the MCU until that whole Jonathan Majors situation happened. And I was excited to see like the Council of Kangs and all these Kangs come together. But in terms of a movie, the story, it just wasn't hitting it for me. And the characters, other than Ant-Man, who I love Ant-Man, the Wasp is good in it too. And Kang is great. I do like Kang in it. I think his story arc was cool. But I just didn't feel that connected to them. I didn't really like the direction they went with Cassie that much. And it'll be interesting if she's in like a Young Avengers in the future or something like that. But Yeah, it's just it wasn't a super memorable one. There weren't like a ton of highs for me. Again, the Kang losing to the ants part is just weird to me. MODOK was all right. It was just okay. It was just okay.
I have to agree. So my number 5 is also Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. And there was some debate between having this at number 6, but for all the reasons you mentioned in terms of the end credit, it's funny that the end credit is enough for me to keep this movie at 6, but everything else is, not worthy. This movie, I don't think it has gotten a lot of hate, and I don't think it was terrible, but I think it was messy, and I think the CGI did not contribute to the messiness. I mean, I'm trying to think of a percentage of this movie that happens in the quantum realm, which is probably like 90% of it.
Yeah.
And it feels very disorienting through the whole movie. It feels like you're in this weird fantastical place and you don't really know what the rules are, and they kind of make up the rules as they go along. Kang was a great character. I think next to Ant-Man, the character that I really like as well is Hank Pym.
Yeah.
He's, I think he's a great actor. Obviously, he's been doing this for forever. And I really enjoy kind of his interaction with Ant-Man, with Scott Lang, but also kind of with the other characters as well. So hopefully we get to see some more of Hank Pym going forward. But I think the rest of the movie, it just kind of fell flat. It didn't feel like the stakes were very high, especially knowing how powerful Kang was. But it seemed like he was really kind of subdued for most of this movie. And you meant, I never really thought about it, but Kang gets defeated by ants. You're like, really? It's kind of a letdown, I think, is probably the best way for me to think about it. The Ant-Man movies are a bit of a mixed bag, right? Like the first one was great. The second one, I think was good. There was also kind of a hard-hitting end credit in that one as well. But this one missed some of the anchored in the real world comic relief that you got from the ex-cons, right? That you got from Baba Yaga and Luis, right?
Like T.I.'s character.
Exactly, right? Yeah. Like they created some well-rounded characters that offset kind of the fantastical part of Ant-Man and the quantum realm and all of those things. And so I think that's also, a good reason for screenwriters kind of going forward for these next phases and beyond, is that having some anchor in the real world helps to make these movies more enjoyable for the average person. And this one really, again, because we spent the entire movie in the quantum realm, it just felt like it wasn't like a Star Wars movie. Even Star Wars, there's like physical, tangible things that people can relate to in the movie. And I think that was, for me, one of the major struggles with Ant-Man and the Wasp.
That's very valid. Yeah, I mean, those fantastical worlds can work with a Guardians of the Galaxy, for example. But for this, when you already establish a character in the real world who isn't even a superhero who you would picture as fighting fantastical characters in fantastical worlds, it definitely drops you out. And I'm thinking about the beginning of this movie, we jumped into it so fast in terms of him going to the quantum realm, because I think like the first 20-ish minutes or even 10 minutes, you spend time in the real world. And like, how does it start again? What brings them in? Oh, Cassie's like testing out a new thing, I think, that she made, and then they get sucked into it. Right. It was just, like you said, it was just messy. It was a little all over the place. So
I'll jump into 4. And this one was, again, in my mind, kind of somewhat anticipated, but I wouldn't say highly anticipated. And I think it was anticipated because of, initially, it was even the conversations before the trailer. And then when the trailers came out and we saw multiple trailers, you felt like, even though you hadn't seen the movie, you kind of felt like, I feel like I've seen most of this movie. And sure enough, we went into the movie, and not only was it underwhelming from a story standpoint, it just wasn't kind of fully fleshed out, and there were some entertaining parts, but it felt lacking. It felt like it could have been an add-on to the TV series that I think preceded it. But the main part that we were looking forward to seeing in the movie, I think, was also a bit of a letdown because of kind of what ends up happening with the character kind of later on. So for me, my number 4 movie in this ranking is Captain America: Brave New World. And I mentioned, the rumor that Red Hulk is going to be in this movie. Like before we'd even seen anything, Falcon and Winter Soldier ended, and we knew this Captain America was coming. We knew that Falcon was going to become Captain America, which could probably make a whole other video about this, but I'll touch on it briefly. He'll never be, not that Anthony Mackie is not a great actor, not that Falcon is not a good character. There is just something unique and special about Captain America that I don't think will ever be touched. And one of the things we read in this article about Kevin Feige's announcement is that potentially in the future we could see another Steve Rogers, we could see another Tony Stark. That just even the thought of that, makes me a little uncomfortable. Video for another day. But apart from Anthony Mackie's performance in this movie, which I thought was fine, and I feel like he is he could be a leading role and a leading character, just not with this specific character.
Yeah.
That's just my personal opinion.
Yeah.
I think he did a fine job, but the leader was underbaked. He even looked kind of underbaked.
Right.
The actor who played the leader, I think he did fine, but he didn't have. There was just no payoff for the stuff that he went through, and you actually kind of empathized with him. I think maybe more than we were supposed to. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, I was kind of hoping he would win as a result of the fact that he had been manipulated and abused kind of all these years, right? So he ends up going to the raft along with the Red Hulk, and again, you just felt like if you had pieced the trailers together, you pretty much had watched the movie.
Right.
You'd watched the scenes with Red Hulk, and because I didn't have enough invested in Foul Cap as a character, it just was underwhelming for me. And so as we get into the top 3, I think the top 3 really separate themselves from the bottom 3 in this phase.
There's a huge gap.
Yeah. But for all intents and purposes, I mean, I actually enjoyed Falcon and the Winter Soldier TV series. And I felt like if this had been kind of the last 2 episodes, let's say, of the TV series, this would have vaulted the TV series into like the top 3
right.
of all of the MCU series. But the fact that they made it a movie, the fact that there wasn't a lot of intrigue and surprise in the movie, and I think they tried to make it kind of Winter Soldier-esque in terms of kind of this film noir espionage type movie, didn't really work that well for it. They changed the Marvel intro for some reason, which we were like, why did you do that? But
Forgot about that.
That honestly threw us. It's weird how something as simple as that, but it throws you off right at the start of the movie. You're like, okay, so what are we supposed to be expecting here? And then it didn't deliver. It really didn't deliver. So I could go deeper about this movie, but I'll leave it at that. Not Falcon and Winter Soldier. Brave New World is my number 3 in Phase 5.
You're number 4.
Oh, sorry, my number 4 in Phase 5. Yeah.
Yeah, I promise we haven't talked about this beforehand and tried to copy.
We intentionally did not talk about these, yeah.
At number 4, I also have Captain America: Brave New World. Now, you put it best. When I watched the movie, I think it was about an hour and a half in, and I was like, we haven't even seen the Red Hulk reveal yet. So did they just show us the whole end of the movie in the trailers with him in between the cherry blossom trees and all that stuff? And sure enough, they did. I've never seen a movie where they have basically compressed the whole movie into its trailers like that one. Like when we went in, it did feel like it was a rewatch almost. And the payoff wasn't even that good. Like he was Red Hulk for a little bit. He was Red Hulk for maybe 20 minutes. Like you said with the leader, you empathize with the leader a little bit. Like it gets to the point where you're like, dang, he was imprisoned and in solitaire for like 15 years of his life or whatever. It's like, I kind of want to see this guy get a little bit of a win, or at least get his get back at General Ross. The Marvel intro dropped everyone out. And the ending battle, Sam goes back to his like therapy mode and he talks Red Hulk out of it. It was just underwhelming. It was underwhelming. Didn't have a crazy payoff. Like you said, Foul Cap isn't really a lead, and it has nothing to do with Anthony Mackie. He's a great actor, and Falcon was a great character in the first couple phases of the MCU. it's just when you're trying to fill in the shoes of Steve Rogers, who is phenomenal, it just won't work. It just won't work. And I mean, it doesn't help that his sidekick is basically the same character as him, but without a shield.
Right. They
So-
just get weaker and weaker as they kind of go
right?
down. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was just like a very mid-tier Marvel movie for me. There were some high points for sure. I think the flying scenes were cool when they were flying around the adamantium island, the celestial island. That was cool. But they just had all these things that you were anticipating with the movie that were just like really underwhelming when you got there. Whether it was Red Hulk's reveal, whether it was the like adamantium was a huge thing in the first couple trailers, and it's barely talked about in the movie, and they don't even touch the island at all.
Right.
The leader was also a little underwhelming. Just everything that was supposed to be cool about it was underwhelming, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And the Red Hulk was still like cool enough for me to be like, yeah, that was cool. Like it was a fine watch. Yeah, it's definitely just a kind of underwhelming, especially for a Captain America movie, which again, it's a Captain America movie without Captain America, so I don't really know what we were expecting.
Right. Agreed.
But yeah, that's what I have at my 4 as well.
Yeah, and I think we could probably talk about all of these movies in more depth, but you know, the fact that Kang is defeated by a bunch of ants, and then the Red Hulk, the other Hulk, when previously seen, literally had to leave the planet in order to be contained. Right. So this Hulk to be defeated by a lesser Captain America, and then end up in the raft. I mean, partially some of it was his own willingness potentially. But yeah, it just felt underwhelming for a character of Hulk's kind of stature and strength, and they just could have done so much more with it.
I don't really understand why he doesn't take the serum. Like, there's no like moral issue with it if Steve Rogers did it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But he has some sort of issue with it. John Walker was more of a Captain America to me in Thunderbolts than Falcon was in Brave New World.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I don't, and I'm not saying John Walker is Captain America. Like, I'm not saying that. I just feel like his character, I was more invested in him as like a rogue, anti-Captain America.
A version of Captain America.
An anti-version of Captain America, more so than Falcon is a version of Captain America. Right. Yeah, so like we mentioned, it goes like 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I think there's a huge gap between the top 3 and the bottom 3. So at my number 3, this one was loved by a lot of people, and I loved it too. I just feel like compared to the other 2, it doesn't add as much to the MCU as my top 2 do. I also think that it was, and this was what the movie was for, but I do think it was heavily reliant on like fan service and cameos, which is great. I think it was a really fun and enjoyable movie. And that is Deadpool and Wolverine. Really excited for this one. It was really cool to see Hugh Jackman come back as Wolverine. The comic accurate suit was sick. The scene when he pulls on his hood is awesome. The Deadpool like montage fighting scene was cool. Cassandra Nova, the villain, she was awesome. All of the cameos from Blade to X-23, which I love to see X-23, Gambit. It was full of cool surprises. It was a really fun movie to watch. The opening sequence with the bye 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 is one of the funniest and fun Marvel opening scenes. Honestly, an opening scene in like comic book movies, which it was just cool. I'm not sure how much they're going to add. It also looks like that Feige wants to go in a different direction with the X-Men characters, so who knows if X-23 and like Wolverine and Deadpool will be a part of that. But overall, it was definitely a fun and good movie. I just have it at my 3 because I liked the other 2 more, obviously. I think the stories were a lot deeper and went into more depth. Like this one was good. I really liked Wolverine's kind of internal struggle with himself in terms of losing all of the X-Men, and he like just hated himself and kind of needed to have his hero moment, and Deadpool needed his hero moment too, which leads to a really cool ending of the movie. But yeah, I think in terms of story and like love for the characters and overall impact to the bigger picture, it didn't crack my top 2 for those reasons.
Yeah. Again, we mentioned we didn't talk about this beforehand. I think we're going to have a very similar list. I also have Deadpool and Wolverine at number 3, and I think you hit it on the head where it's 100% fan service movie. So if you have a bunch of writers sitting in a room and they're like, okay, how can we make the biggest summer blockbuster, and what are the ingredients that we need to do? I think they nailed this like as close to perfectly as you possibly could. So longtime comic book fans know that these two characters have, quite a history, and they're very similar. The characters are very similar, and the actors are very similar, and the chemistry just comes across right from the from the opening minutes of the film. You mentioned that the opening sequence is probably not going to be topped in terms of action and and impact. So this is the number one grossing R movie in history, right? And it kind of, at least in my mind, it sits a little bit outside of the MCU because of the extreme graphic violence that's a part of this movie, but it works, and they make it work because it's not, it doesn't feel, it's gratuitous, but it feels like a comic book.
Yeah,
gratuitous.
for sure. It definitely feels like a comic book movie.
Yeah.
It definitely sits outside of that realm in terms of, like, we go to the MCU movies as a family. We've been to all of them for however long, and this is the first one that we didn't, just because, like, my younger sister and stuff, and that kind of,
I mean, even your mom wouldn't watch.
Yeah, my mom doesn't want to watch it either, but it kind of pushes it outside of that MCU umbrella. It actually came out at an interesting time because the MCU, for the first time in a long time, I don't even know if they've ever done it, actually, maybe since Iron Man, but there was one Marvel movie that came out that year, and it was Deadpool and Wolverine, and it came at a time where I think the Marvels was the last one, and people were dropping out, and then they wanted to kind of just do like a little bit of a, let's get our heads back in the game, let's get back to the board, and this came out, and everyone loved it, and it kind of existed inside the MCU, but also was a great standalone. It was good for X-Men fans, Deadpool fans, Wolverine fans, Marvel fans, comic fans. Like, it was just a movie for everybody. Yeah. And it was like a good break. It was like a good break to kind of like get back on track for what was coming out after.
Totally. Yeah. I think this was the perfect storm in a good way for Marvel, because you're right. It came at the heels of a very underwhelming and underperforming movie, so they needed something to perform well at the box office. They needed something that fans would get excited about. I don't know how long after the Fox purchase had happened where they got this, but I mean, they even poked fun at Fox, kind of throughout this movie, and it was a completely different Marvel movie than anything we'd ever seen before. It felt like a Deadpool movie, but then they were also able to pull in all of these MCU references that MCU fans that might not have been as invested in, say, the Deadpool movies before. Like, I had seen them, but it was more like, I heard they were good. They were set outside the MCU, so I'm like, sure, let's watch these. I was obviously familiar with the character. I've known him since I was reading comic books as a young kid. So it was the perfect scenario for Marvel to say, let's figure out all the pieces that we can do, throw all of our cards on the table here. And it really felt like they did, because the cameos in here, you're like, wait, what?
Yeah,
like,
right.
They were crazy.
Some of them are just so, like, they had like the old Juggernaut in there. They had the old Toad. Like, Chris Evans was in it as Human Torch. They just were throwing in a ton of characters. Yeah. It was fun.
Yeah, it's just and now that I'm thinking back to all these things, it's because I haven't rewatched it since we saw it in theaters, and I think I might, just because it's a super fun movie, just to watch and just feel good. It's a typical summer blockbuster. Now, where it sits in terms of next movies in this next phase and going forward, I think it's the one movie in this list that probably has the least impact, but I could be wrong. There are, the TVA makes appearances in this movie, and of course, Wolverine is a key X-Men character who we know are going to get their own movies going forward. So it remains to be seen, but Deadpool and Wolverine, number 3 for both of us in our Phase 5 ranking.
I also want to say on Deadpool and Wolverine, it had one of the coolest, like, comic book montages with the Wolverines, like, looking through the Wolverines in different universes. That was awesome too.
Yes, it was very cool. Yeah, I remember we talked about it afterwards, and I was like, I need to show you these covers, because they literally replicated them perfectly for film. So yeah, if you're a comic book fan and for some reason you haven't seen this movie, which is unlikely, go and watch it, or watch it again. So number 2 in our Phase 5 breakdown, and again, I'm thinking we might be similar. However, let's see where we're at. For me, number 2, and this was a tough one because I actually haven't watched this one, and I'm probably giving away what it is already. I haven't watched this one for a little while, and I've been wanting to rewatch it. I think when it came out, the emotional impact of this movie was completely unexpected based on what was happening with the characters. But I thought that because of so this is a sequel to the previous two movies, and because of the tone of the previous two movies, it was unexpected, and it also still followed the typical cadence of the first two in this series in terms of the fun and the action and the camaraderie, all of the the relational aspects that make this series probably the best in terms of a team in the entire MCU canon. But my number three is Guardians of the Galaxy. Sorry, my number two is Guardians of the Galaxy number 3. For the reasons that I just mentioned, that the emotional impact of this movie was completely unexpected. Here you have, Rocket, who is not even a real raccoon. He's a manufactured raccoon, mostly. Having, you kind of get his backstory and his relationship with his other kind of manufactured animals. And it was just like so powerful. Like I was surprised at how connected I was to this. And to see him, he's kind of a beloved character, I think, in the MCU. I think even back to Endgame, I mean, it was him and Nebula basically, who are kind of left, and who helped spearhead things, with Captain America and Black Widow at the time, in order to kind of put the wheels in motion for the events of Endgame. But Rocket is a beloved character, and for him to get the spotlight in his own movie, I think was awesome. Mm-hmm. And it was both emotional but a fun movie at the same time. The Guardians series, I remember we talked about this a few days ago, when Guardians was announced as one of the teams in the MCU, and that they were going to make a series of movies about these. We were like, the average person doesn't even know who the Guardians of the Galaxies are. The average comic book fan doesn't even know who the Guardians of the Galaxies are. But James Gunn, bless his heart, who's now gone to DC and is making great things over there, did a phenomenal job with these movies. And there's a part of me that's sad that we won't see this version of the Guardians ever again, because they were, very much his signature style and his signature storytelling, which made this movie, a close to number 1, but a number 2 in my Phase 5 ranking.
So 1 and 2 were extremely difficult. I have both of the movies in my top 2, probably in my top 10 MCU movies. And again, we didn't talk beforehand, but I also have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I feel like that could be because I've only seen it a couple times, and the last time I watched it was a couple of years ago, maybe a year ago. But it's so strong. Like, and you mentioned James Gunn. James Gunn is so good at taking characters that people don't know. And we watch our Superman review because we talk about some of the characters. Like Mr. Terrific is one of those examples. Is like, I've never really known much about this character, and he does such a great job. But he took the Guardians of the Galaxy, and I was younger when the first one came out. I had no idea who this team was, and you fall in love with them instantly. Rocket is my favorite character in the Guardians of the Galaxy. And to see his story like that in Guardians 3 was just so emotional, and it was so impactful. And he takes a character that you kind of think is unserious and super funny, doesn't really give a crap about anyone or anything. Well, now you're looking at his backstory and why he is who he is and what he's had to go through. It's an amazing movie. It really is. The High Evolutionary is one of the most evil villains the MCU has probably ever seen. And his motive is just because he thinks he's God. Like, there's not many Marvel villains that are like that. And it introduces Adam Warlock, who I think is great. James Gunn just did an amazing job. And like you said, it's too bad that we're probably not going to see something like this again. He created arguably one of the best trilogies in definitely the MCU, probably in like comic book movies. I'd maybe have Captain America ahead of it, only because I love Winter Soldier and Civil War so much. But I mean, 1, 2, and 3, the Guardians movies are great, and Guardians 3 was it was phenomenal.
Yeah, phenomenal. And I agree with the assessment of, the only reason I would put Guardians ahead as a trilogy is because Civil War feels almost like an Avengers movie as
Sure,
opposed to a
yeah.
Captain America movie, although he's a headliner. What James Gunn was able to do with these characters and these movies, and his signature blend of humor and heart and action is just it was great. And I agree, 1 and 2 were very close for me. So that leaves us with number one
movie,
which which I think we all know what it's going to be.
Yeah, so obviously I don't have any build up to this. My number one is Thunderbolts. I love this movie so much. I saw it in theaters 3 times, and it's just such a different movie that Marvel has done. Like all these internal battles that these characters face, and we've not really had a dysfunctional team. Like the most dysfunctional team the MCU has had is maybe Avengers in the first one, maybe Guardians in the first one, but none that are like genuinely do not like each other or themselves as much as the Thunderbolts did at the beginning of their movie. They also took a ton of characters that we care about some of them. We obviously love Bucky. I loved Yelena, and I know you loved Yelena too. Red Guardian was funny in Black Widow, but like Ghost, John Walker, who people didn't really like in Falcon and Winter Soldier because he did such a good job of playing the character. People didn't like him. Like they're taking Taskmaster, who isn't really in Thunderbolts that much anyway. They take these characters and you just fall in love with them because of the struggle and because of their like drive to be something better and like overcoming the fact that they don't think they're deserving of being something better, but they also want to do good. The movie just delivered so well on like character growth and what the story was supposed to be about in terms of like a group of people coming together who connect through their flaws and through their issues. I just love the movie.
Yeah, no disagreement there. And I also have Thunderbolts as my number one, obviously. And what I want to kind of dive into, so we have a Thunderbolts breakdown video, which you guys should go check out. There will be a link to our other Beyond the Film Room playlist videos, so just go and check out that one for a more in-depth breakdown here. But what I want to comment on was something that, going back to this article in this interview with Kevin Feige and talking about the Thunderbolts specifically, and the fact that, so he said it was one of his favorite movies. It was reviewed really well, but underperformed at the box office. And Feige's thought was that, there were characters that were introduced, he said, in TV series, and he felt like if you didn't watch these TV series, then you wouldn't be invested in the characters. And someone in the comments kind of mentioned that the only character that was introduced in a TV series was John Walker, which is true. So the others were all introduced in a movie. The difference, though, and the clarifying comment to this is that their tendencies, their personalities, their backstories were unpacked in TV series.
Yeah.
And I think that to his point, and this might be, he might not have clarified this, but I think this is what he was talking about, was the reason this movie is so strong and the reason why we have such an attachment to the characters is because we did get to see Falcon or Winter Soldier's Bucky's character get unpacked in terms of the emotional baggage that he was carrying in Falcon and Winter Soldier. We did get to see, so we saw Yelena in the Black Widow movie. Now, she was a co-star because it was Black Widow's movie, but we do get to see their relationship unfold. But we get an even deeper dive in Hawkeye with Yelena's character and the fact that she's been struggling with this to the point where she wants to go and hunt down the man that she thinks is responsible for her death. Ghost, we really don't get much of beyond Ant-Man. But we do get a little bit more understanding of her in this movie. And John Walker, of course, as pointed out, is introduced in Falcon and Winter Soldier, and we do get his backstory there as well. Red Guardian is the only one who, and he's a bit of comic relief in this movie, and he's a bit of a contrast to Yelena's kind of depression. He's also kind of depressed in this movie, but he's much more lighthearted, and I think he's the oldest of the group, and he understands that you just got to kind of pick yourself up and dust yourself off, right? He comes cruising through with the red limo through the desert, and he's like, "Hey, we're a team again. Let's get after it," right? Mm-hmm. He's the one who I think has the most optimism for the future. But I do think it's an interesting point that because we did get to see these characters get developed and unpacked, and we get to hear and see more from their perspective in some of the TV series, we are now more invested in this movie. And for those that missed out on that, if you didn't watch Hawkeye, if you didn't watch Captain America and or Falcon and Winter Soldier, and then you're missing on some of that backstory, maybe you're less invested when it comes to the movie. Now, that's not necessarily Marvel's fault, let's say, but I can understand his point, and I can understand kind of going forward why there might be a desire to shift away from more content and go back to either features or television. Obviously, they're not going to stop doing either one, but the strategy might be different going forward. So I think it's going to be interesting to see as a strategy going forward, because the number one movie on our list benefited from deep character development that was a result of being able to see these characters on a smaller screen, albeit, but for an extended period of time where you could build a relationship with them.
True.
So when they go back to the old formula of, maybe one or two movies a year, what will it be like in terms of the character development? And will we see that depth? And I think we will, but it'll probably be like it was in the first 3 or 4 phases, where it's going to take several years in order to build that up.
Right. It's kind of funny actually thinking about it now, because yes, there were a few characters that were given growth through TV shows, especially in John Walker and Yelena. But what's funny is that their TV shows came out like in a time when the shows were performing well. Like WandaVision and Loki were performing well, and Falcon and Winter Soldier was around that time. Hawkeye was shortly after. And then we got a ton of other stuff that had nothing to do with these characters or anything. And we're seeing them like 3, 4, 5 years later. And so by that point, if you are watching Marvel TV shows on Disney Plus within the past couple of years, and you're seeing things that, weren't performing as well, then you're like, oh, well, I'm not going to go and watch the other ones that came out. And now you are missing out on the characters that were coming out during a good time. I'm not saying Falcon and Winter Soldier was like an amazing show, but it was definitely a good one in comparison to what has come out recently.
Right.
And Hawkeye, I loved Hawkeye.
Yeah, loved Hawkeye too.
Yeah, it might be you just have to start dialing back the amount of content that you're pushing out, like you're saying. I don't know if it means stopping the Marvel shows entirely, although I think it is hard to keep up with the shows and the movies at the same time.
Totally.
And that could be why some people might not be able to connect to Thunderbolts more so.
Right.
But I think you make some good points. It's tough because the characters were in shows that were performing well. They just came out a while ago and before a lot of shows that started to underperform.
Totally. Yeah, I agree. And I think, there were entire shows in Phase 5 that we didn't watch, right? Like, we didn't watch Echo at all. She might be a cool character, but there was not a whole lot of interest. We haven't seen, so we will watch Daredevil. We just haven't seen it yet. And again, those were because we're coming at it from the MCU kind of cinematic perspective. And I think there was this thought that if these aren't necessarily going to be tied into the MCU films, they're less of a priority. And so I think going forward, the strategy for the movies, again, will be quality over quantity. And I think Feige actually said that. And we've had many conversations about this where it's like, hey, I'd rather... You don't have the same level of anticipation as we did in the initial phases.
No, yeah.
And
not
it'll be
until
cool to get
now.
back to that.
Not until
now. Exactly. Now. And I think that's a good segue. Our next review is going to be Fantastic Four. We'll be watching it kind of later this week. So tune into the channel early next week as we drop that review and breakdown. And then again, we'll also be talking some more about Kevin Feige's announcement for kind of Phase 6 and beyond. For what's next for the MCU. Yeah,
I'm sure that Fantastic Four is going to introduce us into what could be expected for Doomsday. So there's going to be a lot to talk about, and this is a really good time to be a Marvel fan again. I think Thunderbolts is such a relief to watch and be like, okay, we're getting back on track, especially after how Brave New World was a little underwhelming. I'm so excited for Fantastic Four, Doomsday, Secret Wars, and Spider-Man. We got Fantastic Four this weekend, and we'll get a review out for you. I'm sure it will be a lot to unpack for that one. So
If you haven't hit like and subscribe, definitely do that, and we'll see you on the next video.